Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the gubernatorial debate for the 68th Annual YMCA Youth in Government Conference. We're joined tonight by 4 gubernatorial candidates and our moderator to engage in a series of policy debates. We're going to start with opening statements from each candidate. They will have 90 seconds for their opening, at which point we will move into questions asked by our moderator. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond and will be allotted 1 rebuttal bonus during tonight's debate. We will close with 1 minute of closing statements from each candidate. Without any further ado, I will turn it over to tonight's moderator, Governor Pfeiffer.
Hi, I'd just like to thank everybody for being here, but I won't delay us too much. We can get right into our opening statements. First up, we have Abigail Hopper.
Hello, my fellow delegates. My name is Abigail Hopper. I go to Lebanon High School, and I just wanted to thank Tyler, Elise, Susan, and the TNCCE for working so hard to make sure that we are going to have a full, fun, and productive conference this year. I know that YIG is definitely not what we expected and looks very different than normal, but I'm still just as excited to be here. With everything that's happened in the last year, we have been presented with a very unique opportunity to really look at leadership and what the state of Tennessee really needs. As your governor, I would work with the legislature to ensure that every voice is heard and represented. Many social justice movements have been brought back up, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's vital that we keep that momentum going and continue working towards equality. Our government must work with the people to keep moving forward, not fight against them. As your governor, I would be a reliable voice for Tennesseans. I would make sure that all decisions and statements that I make are trustworthy and align with that of the CDC and other medical professionals. I do not have a medical degree and I'm not a doctor, so it is vital that our leadership leans on those who are working tirelessly to help prevent the spread of the virus. On top of that, there are a lot of other issues that have been pushed to the side, reasonably so, but should not be forgotten about. I would not only focus on dealing with the current situation, but also ensuring that we are moving into a brighter future and will come out of the other side of this pandemic into a better, stronger, and more united Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Next is Colin.
Hello, delegates, and I'd just like to thank you all for showing up to YIG this year. And I know that it's very different from what we're used to, but I just love how that no matter what the circumstances, there are people who want to debate issues and legislation. I just love that fact that there are people who still want to become involved in that process. But moving forward, I believe that Tennessee is a great state, and I love to call myself a Tennessean. However, I believe that with the rise of the pandemic and the breakout of COVID-19, that there have been some flaws revealed in the state's legislation and the social programs that have been implemented. As governor, I would put a heavy focus on the working people of Tennessee because ultimately, when you break it down and look at it, Tennessee is a state made up of working people. It's not a state made up of the 1%. It's people who have worked their way up and built what they have. And I would like to protect those people's interests as governor and make sure that everybody's voice is heard, that nobody feels like they're being left out, like nobody feels that the system is being put to work against them in any way, shape, or form. They say that great leaders are made by people who surround themselves with people smarter than them. And trust me, I follow that philosophy to a T. I don't know everything about every topic, but I would like to learn more. I would like to make sure that everybody's voice is heard, and I would like to make sure that you have that input as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Next is Comfort.
Hi, my name is Comfort Markwei, and I'm so glad to be with y'all, even if it is via Zoom tonight. This is my 3rd conference in my 2nd year as an officer. It has been such a privilege to work with the TNCCE staff and my fellow officers over the past 2 years, and it would be incredible to serve you all once more as governor. As governor, I will focus on improving education in Tennessee, especially as COVID has taken a toll on our education system. We are rated 47th in the nation in education, and we can do so much better. I will focus on representing all of our citizens with an emphasis on the homeless population in the state. And I will do my best to push Tennessee towards helping end this pandemic by listening to and enforcing the CDC's guidelines on mask wearing and distance in public spaces. I will push for the legalization of recreational and medical marijuana. And these are just a few of the issues that have captivated my attention. As governor, I will do my best with the help of my cabinet and with your support to make a positive impact on this state. Rather than pushing my own political agenda, it will be my point to listen to you all and do what's best for you. Once again, my name is Comfort Markwei, and I hope you'll cast your vote for Comfort at the polls. Thank you.
Thank you, Comfort. And now our fourth and final candidate, Garner, has the floor.
Thank you, Lucy. I'll try to keep this short and sweet. If you don't know me, my name is Garner Cherry, and I go to Green Hill High School. My main goal as governor is going to be encouraging the future by laying the foundation today. In that sense, however, Tennessee is in a poor place right now. The renewable energy below the national average and regressive laws being instated to suppress minority voices is apparent that we're doing something wrong. We need a strong push in the opposite direction. My platform encompasses increasing renewable energy and supporting it with the proper infrastructure to make net carbon emissions decrease and to address institutional racism at its core to finally make Tennessee as not being seen as living in the past. We are tomorrow and we have so much to do. I will help make those first steps if elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Garner. Next, we will move on to question 1. So as Tyler said earlier, I'll go ahead and ask the question. If at any point you feel that you have a rebuttal, you can just raise your hand and you'll be recognized after the final speaker. The order for question 1 is Garner, Comfort, Abigail, then Colin. So we'll start out with Garner. Question 1. Over the course of the past year, a substantial amount of learning time has been lost in K-12 classrooms across the state. What course of action do you see being the most successful in regaining that lost time? In other words, how will students be caught up to the benchmarks that they've fallen short of over the past year?
Yeah, so that's really is a substantial problem that we've seen. I myself have experienced a lot of struggling in that department, but if we really want to see the change we need to see with education, first off, we can't hold students accountable this year for how they're doing. I feel if we do too much of that, we're just going to discourage them learning. So if we want to see a substantial change, what we're going to have to do is institute better tutoring programs and more after-school programs in order to encourage them to catch up. In addition, I think that really opening schools as much as possible over the summer to have summer programs would also be very beneficial.
Thank you, Garner. I will now recognize Comfort.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I love this question, especially as students ourselves, seeing how education has been lost since last March. So we actually have a piece of legislature going through right now that I believe has passed, Senate Bill 7002, advocating having schools require a summer program, 4-week summer program, an hour a day, 4 days out of the week to remediate students. They have incorporated lunches into that and outside exercise and giving students the time and the attention that they need to be able to make up for that lost learning. I think if we see that piece of legislature through and build upon it, we will really make sure that we close that gap, especially for our K-8 students who really do need those foundations with literature and with math. I think extending beyond COVID too, putting our time and our resources towards our impoverished areas, places like, for example, Laverne High School that do their dual enrollment through Motlow instead of MTSU, and schools that house so many bright minds who are just suppressed in their environment. I think if we take time to really focus energy and money and resources towards them, we will not only see an improvement in education in the state, but we will also see a jump after this pandemic.
Thank you, Comfort. Abigail, you're free to speak.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important question. And like Garner said, we've all experienced this. I think, sad as it may be, this pandemic really has uprooted the already existing cracks in our school system. We can really use this as an opportunity to rethink the way our education system is structured. I do think as far as getting students, particularly K-8, who have lost their core subjects, getting them back ahead, we can definitely utilize after school programs, whether that's the teachers stay after and tutor or outside people. I think if the teachers stayed after, we could definitely provide additional funding to them. And then summer programs would also be extremely beneficial, so students don't have to retake classes where they lost that core information. But I think we could definitely use this as an opportunity to we really saw how there were so many inequities in our system for students who don't have access to the internet, or like as soon as school got out, they lost all of their resources. So I think that we could really use this as an opportunity to kind of help them out, and also kind of lose the focus of standardized testing, and focus more on the actual information that our students need to get.
Thank you, Abigail. Colin, you now have the floor.
Thank you. So I believe that when you really get down to it and you look at the situation in which we found ourselves in the current education system, you see that when we take these education systems that we've built up based on simple tests and retention of memory and information learned in class, you see a stark drop-off in effectiveness, especially in the online environment. And I believe that is a fundamental issue with the way Tennessee teaches their students basic core subjects. Especially in cases of K through 5, where it's a substantial development area and growth period in their young ages, I believe that these tests don't help them at all. I believe moving forward, Tennessee needs to implement more formative-based testing, mastery-based teaching to make sure that these students are reaching the levels that they need to reach in these core subjects, especially, like I said, K through 5. I believe one way to reincorporate these core subjects into their learning is to, once we've initially gotten students back into schools, to start giving formative exams to see where these students have basically fallen to, what they need to build up and what they're lacking in. And then moving forward, we can give more personalized lessons, whether that be after school tutoring, more personalized time in class, personalized homework, whatever it needs to be. There needs to be more personalized learning in Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin, and thank all four of you for those concise and insightful answers. Seeing no requests for a rebuttal, we'll go ahead and move on into question number 2. Question 2 asks if what you think public transit should look like in the state of Tennessee over the next 4 years, and asks whether or not you think it should be prioritized. We will begin with Colin, and then we'll proceed into Comfort, Garner, and then Abigail. Colin, you have the floor.
Right. So I think that personally, public transit is a very important part to growing urban areas and the development of those urban areas. When you look at it, public transit not only helps the environment, but it also helps people get in the economy. It helps people get to work. It helps people get home without having to worry about car payments, gas bills, whatnot. And I'd like to see in the next 4 years a development on what Tennessee has already built up with things like their metro bus systems, whatnot. I'd like to see an expansion of those systems throughout more of the cities and more of the urban areas. For example, I'd like to see things like committees get together to assess the efficiency and the area covered by current bus routes, and then assess if there needs to be new routes created to cover a larger area in a more efficient time frame. I believe that there also should be more public incentive to take public transit, seeing as it is a way to help the environment rather than to have everybody drive their cars and potentially harm the environment. There could be systems in place to further incentivize public transit use, such as tax incentives, or just generally more funding on sanitary matters to give public appeal or public reception a higher boost. And I'd like to see a lot of that moving forward.
Thank you, Colin. Comfort, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think public transit is a really key focus in our state, especially in cities like Nashville and Memphis. And I know Gardner touched on this earlier in her opening. I think that public transit is incredibly important, and funding it will help many people get to work and commute to school as well, and combat the devastating effects of climate change. I think we need to take more strides towards that as Tennesseans. So to fund this initiative, I propose using funds from the capital project federal grants, such as those provided by the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America. I think putting money and putting time towards that, especially focusing, like I said earlier, on our cities first, making sure that our infrastructure in our city is established and that people can get around on nicely paved roads, on clean buses that, as Colin said, we incentivize it by making those bus tickets cheaper and more accessible to people. And then expanding out into our suburbs and having stops that you can find more commonly. I know like people out in Smyrna and Laverne, although, you know, we don't have those large cities and epicenters, I think it'll be helpful if we did to have a bus stop in these more suburban cities that can get you to cities. Yeah.
Thank you, Comfort. Garner, you now have the floor.
Thank you. So building off of what has previously been said, obviously we need to have a better distribution of funds for citywide projects for buses and things like that. But what I would really like to focus on is expanding definitely way more into rural areas. Almost half of Tennesseans don't live in a major metro area from my research. So when you look at that, you can really see that we need more things like more bus routes outside of those cities, more train stops outside of those cities, ways for people to get to work and to get where they need to go without having to live in one of those areas, because many people just don't. And cities don't vote, Tennesseans do, and when more than half of them don't live in those cities, I don't think it's fair to just focus on them. But also, when you could look at things like public transit and riding on a bus instead of a car, even in Tennessee, with the way that our infrastructure is set up, riding in, going in an electric car is actually far worse than going in a thing like a bus, even though a bus uses non-renewable fuel because so much of our energy comes from coal. So we really need to focus on this, especially in rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Garner. Abigail will be our last response for this question.
Thank you. I definitely think this is an issue that's been completely overlooked over the last year while we've all been working at home. I know that my hometown has the Nashville Star, which goes through a lot of smaller towns surrounding Nashville, and that has been extremely beneficial to my community. Just because it's better for the environment. There's less commuting. It goes through like 3 or 4 different towns on its way and goes there and back. I think that would be a really great thing to expand or look into in other areas. Anything we can do to provide more means of transportation from suburban and rural areas into bigger cities. So again, trains, buses, like there's the CARTA system in Chattanooga, which is their bus system. And that would be extremely beneficial, like not only for convenience again, but for traffic control and reduction of gas emissions from cars. And that would vary based on the town or city, depending on what the area needs. Although I think it is important to consider that as more of our businesses are moving into a remote model, the priority and whether this is important to invest in or not might change over the next couple of years. But as of right now, as more people are starting to go back to work, I think that it is something we still need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Seeing no rebuttals, we'll go ahead and move into question number 3, which reads, despite record-breaking turnouts nationwide in the 2020 election cycle, Tennessee remains among the worst states in voter turnout percentage. If elected, how would your administration work to improve statewide voter turnout numbers? Our order for this question will be Comfort, followed by Garner, Colin, and then Abigail. Comfort, you now have the floor.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, as we know, Tennessee has one of the worst voter turnout rates in the country. And the best way to increase voter turnouts is to make people feel as though they are heard and that their vote matter. Many voters in Tennessee feel like their vote doesn't matter and therefore they fail to vote. And to some extent, they're right. Many precincts and districts in Tennessee have been unfairly gerrymandered and as to give one party an advantage over another. So to combat this issue, and we've seen states like Missouri, and we've seen Ohio and Utah do this, where they established an independent commission, that would redraw election boundaries that are free of any partisan favoritism. The people in these committees would be selected via in a lottery that heavily considers an application and qualification experience, and they would draw these lines irrespective of, without any information on the party affiliation of the citizens within the state. That way, you're focusing more on the communities, the racial identities, the gender identities, the core beliefs of these people in these areas, and drawing those lines accordingly, rather than focusing on what are the highest concentration of Republicans and Democrats here, and drawing them according to that. That way everyone feels like there's more competition as they're voting, and they feel like their votes matter and that their votes are heard and they can have an impact in our elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Comfort. Garner, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I agree with Comfort on the sense that we need to stop gerrymandering in its tracks. It is entirely undemocratic. However, I support using what I believe is called the closest split line method, where counties are divided purely in a mathematical sense, where it is entirely left up to the math where how county boundaries will be drawn and how voter boundaries will be drawn. This would prevent any sort of gerrymandering, even in like the smallest forms of unrecognized bias in these committees. Also, I think that we need to instate automatic voter registration for upcoming voters who are 17 and 16, so that they can immediately vote and not have any issues with that. And also have automatic voter re-registration, where if there is any issue where you're not registered to vote and you're past those ages, you're still okay to vote and you won't be arrested. For example, like there was a story of one woman who was arrested for trying to vote because she did not know that she was not properly registered. And these are like huge issues that we need to fix. And that's how you're going to increase voter turnout, is when people aren't afraid to go and make their voices heard. In addition, I think that we need to make our electoral votes proportional to our population. In the last presidential election, what was it? I believe it is 2 of the Tennessee's electoral votes would have gone to Joseph Biden. And that's a problem when just didn't happen. The Donald Trump got to take them all when a percentage of Tennesseans did not vote for him. And so in order to increase democracy, we need to increase voter turnout by making people feel like their votes matter in that sense.
Thank you, Garner. We'll go ahead and move into Colin's answer. Colin, you now have the floor.
So I think some very good points have already been brought up, and I agree with most of the points that have already been stated. I believe that one of the best ways to increase voter turnout is the simple things like increased social pressure, going door to door, and maybe not in this current social climate. But, it's the simple things that really matter and get people out voting. And, when you talk about these people who feel uneducated or unaware, who feel like their voices don't matter because of their lack of knowledge, there's things that you can do to help these people feel more a part of a system rather than just these outliers who don't deserve a voice. Things like personalized voting plans, asking them when they plan to vote, if they plan to vote, when they're available to vote, whatnot. These personalized polls are really what get people feeling like they're part of the system rather than just these outlying parts that don't really fit in anywhere in the system. Similarly, I agree that there should be more distinct and proportionate district lines drawn based on both population and party representation in a state and district. This way, there's more votes proportionate to the people who live there, proportionate to the parties that they generally vote for. And that way, we get a clearer representation of who's voting and what they're voting for, and it's a good way to eliminate gerrymandering in the state of Tennessee.
Thank you, Colin. Abigail, you now have the floor.
Yeah, so while Tennessee does have one of the worst voter turnouts, we did see an increase from the 2016 election to the 2020 election, and specifically in youth voter turnout. This was because the election was seen as especially important last year, but it's really important that we keep that momentum going and really emphasize that every election is important. In order to do this, we need to acknowledge that social media, for example, is not just a subpart, but the foundation of our youth social lives. And I think we could really capitalize on that. And this is where a lot of people get all of their information from. And so it could be a really good resource for encouraging people to vote. I think that was a large part of the increasing voter turnout last year. But in terms of our older demographics, we need to make sure that there are easy and safe ways for everyone to vote, regardless of their situation. So I think that drive-through voting actually would be something to look into. Drive-through testing and vaccinations are both working really well. And it would be very easy technology-wise and relatively cheap. And then I think that mail-in and absentee voting should be an always option, not just an option during the pandemic. Because it made it a lot easier for a lot of people. And as long as we're working to make sure that all of the votes are counted correctly, then I think those could both be very beneficial.
Thank you, Abigail, and thank you all for those answers. We're going to go ahead and move into our fourth question now. Climate change is an issue that frequently falls on the federal government. In your opinion, what role should Tennessee as a state play in combating climate change? Our order for this question is going to be Abigail first, followed by Colin, Comfort, and then Garner. Abigail, whenever you're ready, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I think that, again, an increase in remote work and a decrease of commute would be really good for fighting climate change. But as far as what our government can do, we really need to be working on promoting green energy, such as wind and solar, which are both much cheaper and better for the environment. There's actually a bill at this conference that is Red Senate Bill 21-3-5, which is an act to provide subsidies to small businesses transferring to sustainable energy sources. I think this is a really good idea. This bill would not only help out small businesses who have been struggling through the past year anyways, but it would give them an incentive to start working towards more eco-friendly solutions. And I also think our government needs to be working and investing in our national parks and our state parks and in our ecosystems to restore them, because healing our natural system is the most feasible and realistic and fair option to combating climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Colin, you now have the floor.
Thank you. So when you look at an issue like climate change, it can initially be an issue that you would put on the federal government due to its massive scale and just proportion it's a global issue that affects many different nations across the globe. I think the best way for a state to combat this issue is to manage the regulations within its own state, offer benefits to its citizens who choose to live a greener life, offer these incentives so that there are more people per capita switching to green energy, recycling, whatnot. There was a white Senate bill last year that offered tax breaks to people who would switch over to electric cars and cleaner energy on their commutes to work and whatnot. I would like to see many more of those bills in the future. Similarly, there was a White House bill last year that introduced regulations on greenhouse emission caps in the state of Tennessee, and any business or company that went over these cap limits would pay a fine, and these funds would be reinstated into the economy for more social programs in order to better benefit the economy and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Comfort, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, so another question that I really love and just wish I had more time to speak on, but I too agree with the state incentivizing businesses to switch over to green energy and offering subsidies for that. And I think that we need to, as Tennesseans and in Tennessee's government, recognize climate change as an issue to begin with. As we know as youth that we do, but if you look at Tennessee's budget this year, you cannot find the word climate change in it at all anywhere. And I think that's our first problem. In terms of a solution, I think that for our rural areas, especially with getting public transport out there, like Cherry touched on, and getting those people access, setting up wind farms out in our rural areas, providing jobs and giving us more people more taxable revenue that's coming in that we can use to develop more sources of green energy and build more wind farms, and also taking that revenue and putting it towards urbanizing some of these areas and giving people access to jobs out there and hospitals out there and stores and etc. So I think that a public-private partnership with a solar energy or wind energy company to build a wind farm out in our rural areas, or money through federal funding, or pulling from our rainy day fund for that would be helpful for this cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Comfort. I just wanted to go ahead and take this opportunity to remind everyone that this is the final question and it will be your final opportunity to use any rebuttals. That being said, we'll go ahead and move into our final response for this question. Garner, you have the floor whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So within my local community, I'm very close to the Percy Priest Lake. So I have been able to see the positive effects of hydroelectric energy near me. And I think that Tennessee is uniquely equipped to use that in order to fight climate change by using alternative forms of energy that are unique to Tennessee. We are not equipped to handle certain kinds of energy, but we are equipped to handle other kinds. So using hydroelectric in combination with, I believe, solar energy would be best fit based off of where we are positioned within the United States. I believe that we could provide a serious impact on our carbon emissions, and then by using that in conjunction with switching our power grids over to use more clean energy, we could see a serious decrease in Tennessee. Only around 8% of our energy currently is renewable. So even increasing that just above the national average of 10%, I think is a very, very good goal in the next few years for Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you, Garner. Seeing no requests for rebuttal, we'll go ahead and move into our closing statements. The order for that will be Colin, followed by Abigail, and then Garner, and finally Comfort. Colin, you have the floor whenever you're ready.
Since I'm a little more pressed on time, I'll try to keep it concise. I'd just like to thank everybody who's watching for being here at YIG, being active in your communities, and being the change that you want to see in Tennessee. I just really would like to applaud you for that. I think it's very admirable. But overall, I think it's just very important that Tennessee has a governor who would focus on the working people, the people who need it most, those discriminated against, marginalized communities. And I believe that person is me, somebody who would focus on not only those people, but, for example, drug addicts, impoverished children in schools, and bettering the environment so that we have a sustainable future for our children. And if those are things that you care about, I would implore you to cast a vote for Colin on the ballots. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colin. Abigail?
Thank you. I just want to thank you all so much for watching. And I wanted to address a couple other issues that my administration would focus on, those being Tennessee's overall infrastructure through a detailed survey of all of Tennessee's infrastructure and making sure everything is safe and structurally sound, vaccines and emphasis on COVID-19 protocols, making sure that our vaccines are getting distributed, and then also a mask mandate until vaccines are widely available. My administration would also focus on ensuring that our executive and legislative branch are supporting each other, not working against each other. As I mentioned, my platform is generated around moving past and overcoming the current crisis as quickly and smoothly as possible, and coming out of it more united and stronger than before. Again, my name is Abigail Hopper, and I have hope for the Tennessee that we could build together if you vote me as your 2022 Youth in Government Governor.
Thank you, Abigail. Garner, whenever you're ready, you have the floor.
Yeah, so just to sort of surmise my platform again, I think we need to increase green energy and renewable energy so that Tennessee can stop living in the past where we're still using coal excessively. I think that we need to distribute votes proportionate to the population and not electoral votes, rather proportional to the population, so that we can see a president that represents all of Tennessee and not just the majority. I think that we need to see more public transportation to coincide with more green energy. And I believe that we need to really focus on minority and underprivileged communities, especially with all the discrimination that they even face just up to last year with legislation that's been passed. I think that we need to really focus on these people. So please vote Garner Cherry in the polls to see these changes if that is what you want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Garner. Comfort, whenever you're ready, you have the floor.
Thank you. After all that's been said, it's apparent that we all have a passion for the state and its affairs. As your governor, I will prioritize your voices and your interests above all else. I will focus on clean energy, voter turnout, education, expansion of resources into rural areas, and social reform movements. I will make it a point to listen to the CDC and the instructions they've put in place to keep us safe and get us out of this pandemic. And as an officer at this conference, I promise to be welcoming, kind, and open to your commentary. Thank you for taking the time to hear me out today. Once again, I'm Comfort Markwei, and I hope you'll cast your vote for Comfort at the polls. Thank you.
Thank you, Comfort, and thank you to all 4 of our wonderful gubernatorial candidates today who have provided such insightful and well-researched answers. Thank you so much.
I'll jump in to offer a couple of quick thank yous. First, to our moderator tonight, Governor Pfeiffer, thank you for presiding over tonight's proceedings and for advancing some really important issues. To our candidates, thank you for taking the time to appear here and engage in a debate around policy for the benefit of the voting delegates. And delegates, thank you for tuning in. You certainly have a tough choice ahead of you, although I am comforted by the fact that all of these young people before you today are going to do great things for this state and this country in the future. Make sure that you cast your vote when the polls open Saturday morning at 9, and have a wonderful rest of your Youth in Government Conference. Thank you and good night.